Hey everybody, JL and DeVille are still traveling, so you've got me this morning. We were having a great discussion just a moment ago, just while we were waiting for people to join. And I would like, Bob, if you could remember, repeat some of what you said about grace becoming a movement. I think, Lenny, you kind of kicked it off. No, Philip did.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I brought in the idea of, for those that haven't heard it yet, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was approached by some network where they said there was one gospel of grace for the nations, and the other gospel was for the Israelites, still today. And
Oh,
of course, my red flag went up straight away in my head. And then Bob started mentioning about Brian Zahnd. You mentioned something about Brian Zahnd, Bob. Can you carry on from there?
Well, yeah, well, I went to CBZ 10 years ago, called him one day and said, man, what's going on? He said, come up and have a cup of coffee. And I did. And one of the things he said is it's, it, it's bigger than we can imagine, and we should not try to name it. And from that, I've extrapolated a lot of things because I absolutely agree with that. We were talking about all the great movements, the Jesus movement, the prosperity movement, the grace movement, the you name it movement. They're all, what they all end up being is a narrow interpretation of a great truth. I mean, how could you go wrong seeking to be as much like Jesus as possible, which the Jesus movement set out to do? But then people started defining it. They said, well, here's how I see that. And in order to support their belief, they try to get other people to believe the way they believe. The next thing you have, what we have is a denomination, or you could almost call it a demonization. I mean, it's separation, and it's just another form of separation. The problem, the entire problem, the sin that separates us from God is believing that we're separated from God. So separating out, coming out and dividing, drawing a division. I mean, Melissa wants us to discuss the ecclesia, and it's a great subject. It really fits here because the ecclesia isn't the first ecclesia church of Lawrence, Kansas.
right.
The ecclesia is the body of believers. There's no division in there. There will be varied understandings and varied interpretations, but that doesn't make the other guy wrong. That probably means he or she has an understanding that you don't yet have. Just as you may have understanding that they don't have. Doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different places on the journey. And the last thing we need to do is cut the road up into mile markers and tell people they have to stop at X mile marker. It's a journey.
Yes.
That's
Amen.
another thing that, it's this ongoing, unfolding story. I said on a call the other day, the heavens declare the glory of God. And look how we've had that demonstrated in the last few hundred years. Galileo got put under house arrest for having a telescope and looking out at the stars. And then we go to space, and then we have the Hubble scope, and now we have the Webb. And the cosmos is almost cosmosis. It's like bigger than we could ever possibly imagine. And that's just a demonstration of the Word of God. That's just a demonstration of who God is. And if we can find a way to shoot another rocket, if we could launch something off of the Webb to go further out, guess what we'd find out? It's even bigger than the Webb showing us. I said, somebody said to me 20 or 30 years ago, the universe is expanding at the speed of light. And I said, that's just how far we could see, or how fast we can see. And that's been clearly demonstrated in the last few decades. And that's true about God. If we say, well, here it is, here's God, man. I mean, God is grace. I got an idea. Let's start a movement and call it the grace movement. And pretty soon we're going to start confining what grace means. We're going to start defining it. When we define it, we confine it. And when we confine it, slowly the grace just leaks out of it. It just becomes another bunch of people trying to convince each other they're right and everybody else is wrong. And call me a cynic if you want to, but I got 70 plus years experience in this. So I think I can say this. And I've not only experienced it, I've been a part of it. And God help me from being a part of it now, because it's always a possibility. Don't be in fear of it. Just know that what you believe today isn't the whole story, no matter how great a revelation it is to you right now. Right around the corner, right over the hill, right at the next sunrise, there's going to be a greater revelation, because it's timeless, it's eternal.
Ever new.
Infinity would almost apply that you could measure it. I mean, yeah, and I understand that's a contradiction in terms, but it's unlimited.
Bob, I love everything you said, and a lot of it is in my notes. So spot on, dude. Spot on. The Holy Spirit was obviously leading you. Lenny has something to say.
I was just going to add on to some of that. Several years ago, I went to some of the Calvary Chapel churches, and there was this one Calvary Chapel pastor from out west, Mr. Gail Irwin. He used to say things like, you know, a lot of people call Calvary Chapel a movement, but I can tell you from all of my studies, all movements die within 20 years. And he said, if that's where we're going, what's going to happen shortly after that 20-year mark is you're just going to become a monument where you're protecting your own thing. You're protecting your own money, your own building, and your own group of people, because you don't want people stealing your people out of your congregation, because that means less money. And it's just all going to turn into a works-based thing. And unfortunately, some of that has come true. He was right. But he got a lot of flack for saying things like that. And he got a lot of flack for saying he liked the book, The Shack. They came down really hard on him and made him stop associating with Paul Young for that, which was kind of sad, because there were some good things in that book that did need people to pay attention to, and they didn't want to pay attention to it.
You know, what kind of right does someone else have to say who you associate with? Makes no sense to me at all.
That's the thing. They would have kicked him out of the fellowship of Calvary Chapel churches for doing that. But in my opinion, if you're right, you're right.
A lot of organized American churches, Philip, have boards that are in charge, like similar to a board for a corporation. And so they wield some power over the pastor and what they can or cannot say or associate with. Or
it sounds almost like a little bit like communism.
Well,
yeah.
Don't. The pure communism is a sharing thing. It's capitalism in reality, if you want to put a political label on it. Though I don't want to, but it's interesting that they hold a few things over you. They hold the building that you're in. They probably own it. Well, guess what, guys? You don't have to have a building anymore. Matter of fact, Jesus never had a building.
Right.
They hold ordination or licensing over you. Flo and I were ordained and licensed in 1984. When we left that church in 93, or actually early 94, he pulled our license. And somebody said, man, I can get your license. And I said, why would I need to be licensed? Ordination is of God. Licensing is of man.
Yeah. And the word license means that you get something You're allowed to do something, and without having that license, you are forbidden. So that's what licensing means.
And so who can forbid you for continuing to hear and espouse the truth? The only people that can do that is if you are beholden to them in some way financially. Now, say this in fairness to pastors. Most pastors take what they believe is advantage of not participating in Social Security. They don't have to. And so their retirement in many cases is they take their housing allowance. I've known several guys that do this, and it's tax-free money, and every so often they roll over and buy a bigger house and so on and so forth. And pretty soon their retirement is whatever they've been able to do in housing and other investments they make. You got a guy that's 50, 55, 60 years old. He's got, 40 years in this, 30 or 40 years in it. He's locked into this situation. It's a real challenge to think about them pulling that rug out from under you. But they'll do it because, just like Lenny said, they've got a monument, and they got to keep the monument in place. I spent 3 days with Chuck Smith one time. He came to Kansas City, and somebody said, "Man, we need somebody. Pastor Chuck's not going to have a car. We need somebody to haul him around." And I held my hand up. I said, "I'll do it." And a beautiful, vital guy. But most of his ministry depended on the rapture happening May 15th of 1988. I mean, there was a movement for you, the last days movement.
Yeah.
And the math there, it was everybody had it all figured out. It was exactly 40 years to the day that the nation of Israel was declared a nation. It was recognized by the UN. And so that had to be it, man. After that's got to be the generation. And so everybody's getting ready to get right or get left. Used to be the big motto. We had a poster on a wall that showed somebody was being blown out of their tennis shoes, just pulled right out of their sneakers, right? And the caption was "Get right or get left." Well, that was a movement. Of course, they've changed that date over and over and over again. There's still people trying to keep that alive. And it's totally invalidated itself because it wasn't the plan. Man's not going to know because Jesus said he didn't know. So
I think
the church isn't a movement. The ecclesia is constantly in motion because it's ever growing in its understanding. The true body is. But man, when you give it a name, and say this is we are this movement or that movement or whatever, it's just a matter of time till what Lenny said happens, man. Give it 23, maybe you give it 40 years. That's a biblical generation, but it's going to go away.
Yeah.
It won't go away. It'll be the First Baptist Church of Lawrence down the street that's constantly trying to keep members. I'm fascinated. Every town I know of claims it has the First Baptist Church. Now, which one's really the first one?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's an example of the absurdity of that.
Thank you.
It's not absurd for people to gather. It's absurd for them to think that's all there is.
Right.
I think what we are touching on begs the distinction between religion and spirituality. See, religion is man's undertaking.
Right.
Spirituality existed even before the King James Bible came into existence.
Yeah.
There were ancient peoples who understood spirit before anything was ever written down. And see, what certain cultures and societies have done is they've undertaken an idea of writing something down and limiting their understanding of spirituality based on what they understood and what they had written. Whereas spirituality is, I mean, it's universal, it's cosmic, it's way beyond human invention. And we struggle at times to wrap our heads around that. Even our understanding of Jesus, we speak of Jesus as though Christ was his last name. He was Jesus the Christ, the anointed one, the one in whom the reveal of Father was expressed. But sometimes we get so caught up in what I call sentimentality, our version of what he was about, and thinking that that's something that we have to hold on to and contextualize and make mean what we understand. And there's so much more than that.
He would have signed his checks Jesus Bar Joseph. He would. And he wasn't a Christian, by the way. If you want to put a label on him, he was Jesus the Jew.
Yep.
And people keep trying to make a movement out of that. And you're exactly right. I mean, spirituality existed before man existed. We're not a body with a spirit. We're a spirit with a body.
Yeah, I was telling Lenny earlier on the call that the thing that made such a difference for me, and I've said this before, I remember last year I was sitting on the sofa and inwardly I heard, you existed before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you existed before you incarnated, and that's, religion doesn't accept that. Religion can't conceive of that. But that was an awakening that took place within me.
Religion. Think about it.
Yep.
Think about it. I think it's possible that I think we talked about this once on a call. I think it's possible in a way. I think legion is certainly a metaphor for the structured religion that came out to meet Jesus and said, "What are you going to do to me?"
Mm-hmm.
I flash about. I tear at things. I'm miserable. And Jesus, my name is Legion. And Jesus released Legion. But yeah, religion would be coming back together. And I hate to say this because I love the body. And there are many, many people I love who are missing out on some beautiful things.
Yep. You think about it, Legion said, we are Legion because we are many.
Lenny, are you giving us 5 or have you got your hand up?
I was just going to say, continuing like we had our conversation before we started the recording, a lot of different peoples and people groups and cultures have discovered these truths of spirituality over and over again through history. But what would always happen is somebody would say, "Oh, you guys are a bunch of heretics, so we have to execute every one of you." And then they would wipe them out. But then about 50 or 100 years later, everybody would discover the truth again. And then either they would have to do the same thing and execute them all, or a neighboring country would get mad at them and send an army to destroy them all. But then about 100 years later, people would start sifting through the ashes and they would pick up their paperwork and say, "Hey, this is the truth. We've discovered it again." And this has happened almost ever since the time of Jesus and the apostles. In Europe, people would start discovering the truth and it would greatly improve their life. But then sure enough, somebody would come along and say, nope, you people are a bunch of heretics. We got to get rid of all of you. So they would pretty much kill them all off. And then after about 50 or 100 years, the same thing would happen again. People would start to discover the truth. And once again, they'd have to be wiped out. But the thing is, I've read several books over the last several years, and they said after they would kill off all these people, all the spiritual gifts and the miraculous gifts seemed to disappear because everything was just overwhelmed with corruption. But then these groups, after about 50 or 100 years, people would start to discover the same truths that we've been discovering, like things about God's love. And almost instantly, the miraculous gifts would appear again. People would have prophetic dreams that turned out to be 100% accurate. People would pray for healings and people would be 100% healed instantly. And a lot of that's documented in paperwork from Europe from the last 1,000 years or so. But then every single time they would be wiped out. It's only in the last maybe 200 or 250 years when we stopped killing whole groups of people and committing genocide, we're starting to get a better picture of what's really going on. And now we're at a point where we've finally done something different. We've got a lot of people discovering the truth and we can't wipe them out anymore. And a lot of people, if you try to enforce lies, well, they can just pick up their cell phone real quick and say, hey, what you just told me is not historically accurate. I've got my cell phone right here and I can search the historical records and I can see what the early church believers and stuff like that wrote 1,700 years ago or 1,800 years ago. What you're telling me isn't the truth. Here's what the early Christians really believed. And they can just bring it up on their phone within 5 or 10 seconds. So a lot of stuff they've done for the last several thousand years doesn't work anymore. So it's all the old playbook is gone. We are here with what works.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope you're right, Lenny.
Hey, Philip, I've got a question for you. I've been curious about this since you shared earlier. These people, these grace people that said grace is for the Jewish, the nations, and everyone else, the other gospel is for? What
the
is
Israelites?
Okay, but what do they mean? What is the other gospel? There's only one gospel in my mind.
Well, they're saying that the thing is that they weren't willing to actually go into it because they're saying that there's still another age that we've got to go through.
Okay, so they're still waiting for the Messiah, basically.
Well, the thing is, what it is they don't believe. What I think is that they are separating what God has actually brought together, and I think for me it's a closed chapter.
Okay.
Because Ephesians chapter 2, I think 14 and 15, it says that he brought the circumcision and the uncircumcision into his own body, and out of the two he made one new man. I mean, where do you separate that?
And it says there's no longer Jew nor Greek. Yeah. So I agree with you totally. I just wondered what in the world they meant by the other gospel.
Don't look for logic.
Doesn't matter. We don't have to focus on that yet.
Yeah, don't look for logic where there isn't any. I mean,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're
I think sometimes the best is to actually just let it go, because that's what I had to do.
Interesting point. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Interesting point came out in a call the other day. Dal, we were talking about Genesis 3. Dale Howey said, did you ever stop to think that God didn't leave? I mean, man had done something. We have built the entire doctrine that I've grown up with my whole life is separation between God and man. And you've got to do this and do that, and the list is endless to get back together, right? I mean, you not only have to say the prayer, you have to say it right, maybe even in the right tone of voice. I don't know, but whatever you got to do, you got to do it. But when Adam and Eve ate from the tree, God didn't leave. As a matter of fact, and I saw this morning, he said, "Oh, I got you covered." We aren't separated except in our own mind.
Right.
And
And
people that try to, anytime you find people looking to show separation, I mean, Jesus didn't show any separation. Look who he hung out with. Matter of fact, that was the big offense to the church, to the established religion, Stanley, was that he hung out with the wrong people. When the right people started getting, when Nicodemus, for example, Nicodemus, one of those guys, man, he came to him at night because he didn't want to be seen. And said, "We know who you are." He didn't say, "I know." He said, "We know who you are." But in Matthew 25, they got together and said, "We got a monument we got to protect here. We've got a movement, and we got to protect it. And this Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, that's how we're going to combat that. We got to stop that. Let's kill him." And that's never stopped going on, Lenny. And it may not be going on with swords and burnings at the stake, but
I can tell you how it is going on.
yeah.
Basically now it's not physical killing, but it's basically pushing people out the door and telling them not to come back anymore. And statistics show that there are 1 million people being pushed out the door every year on every major populated continent in the world. So that means there's 6 million people being pushed out every year. But like I said, they're not being killed off. They're finding other people to congregate with.
a lot of public shaming too, social media and things like that. But while you were talking, Bob, this is pretty basic, guys, but it popped in my head, so I'm going to share it. I suddenly had a new way to look at the Tower of Babel, because obviously, it's not literal. I mean, God didn't scatter people across the globe to speak different languages because he was afraid they were going to reach him. If they all worked together. Instead, it's a story, I believe, that shows the futility of trying to reach a God who's already with us. Like you said, God never left. He's with us. So I don't know. To me, that's just a different way to look at a childhood Bible story.
Yeah. There's actually something else you said, Bob, about Genesis 3 that's been playing on my mind as well. I've mentioned the same thing. I think it was last week or the week before. If God had never really left them at all, did man actually ever have a physiological change in their nature or their being? I somehow doubt it, because I think a sinful nature is what they thought they had. That's kind of what I'm thinking now.
Well, I can't do justice to it, but I listened to a really great sermon last night by Tommy Miller, and I am. Now, if I don't realize who I am, then I may act out as somebody else. But God not only didn't leave, he didn't disown them. He said, "You've chosen a course here that's not going to be, it's not going to be the pristine garden." But I don't know how to say this. Life is a beautiful thing. All parts of it. We find seemingly undue hardship and stuff that breaks my heart. I see things happen, but there's a wealth in life. I keep going back to the prodigal man. He's the one that understood life. The older brother didn't. Because the prodigal went out there and saw it. He experienced it, the ups and the downs. And we always talk about him being in the pigsty, but he partied a lot before that happened, right? So he had this complete life experience. It's kind of what Jesus did, folks. I mean, he took his inheritance and came to be with us. And religion thought they caused him to fail. They judged him. They said you've squandered your inheritance. You spent yourself here. You don't belong. You don't belong on the farm. You don't belong. And yet the father says, "Wow, boy, been expecting you back. Let's party some more." But I never thought about it till this moment. He didn't come back and the father said, "All right, get your act together. Straighten up." He came back and what did they do? They did exactly what the boy did with the inheritance when he left. They partied. One of these days, that's all going to come together in my head.
I wonder how much we take in the Bible as literal when it's really allegorical or telling a story to teach a particular understanding. But see, religion has said everything is literal and, you gotta, adhere to this doctrine or that dogma or whatever. And we completely miss the life, just like you were talking about, Bob. We missed the party because we were so focused on literalism.
Yeah.
I'm a guy that believes the parables are all true stories because I don't believe Jesus had to make anything up. I don't think he was one of these sensationalist preachers that made up a story to make a point. I actually believe there was a guy that came down from Jerusalem and fell in with thieves, and they beat him up and dropped him in a ditch. That happens all the time. You wouldn't have to look very far to see that happening. And I actually believe a priest walked by, and I could show you examples of the church every day, right now today, walking by people who are laying in the ditch naked and bleeding and needing and walking right by because they don't want to get dirty. And I could show you every day people who walk by people on the street and say, "Well, I'm a successful businessman, and if you'd worked harder, you could have been." That's the Levite. But the real story here is then the guy who, by the way, the Samaritan was not religiously acceptable. The two guys that passed the guy in the ditch would not have anything to do with the Samaritan. He was a half-breed, unacceptable outcast in that culture. And he said, he looked on the guy with compassion. And he said, "Man, I can relate to that because culturally I was born in a ditch." That happens every day, everywhere. That happens at intersections where guys are holding up a sign saying, "Can you give me something? I'm a disabled veteran. I'm a this." That happens it happens all over the place, all the time. But to your point, Stan, those true stories, if you dig into them, have a far greater depth than we've been taught. A depth of meaning that if we'll stand back and see them from that perspective, we'll see those things happening over and over in front of us. And we'll see them as opportunities then for us to help the guy out of the ditch.
So I saw something earlier this week that just made me start thinking a little bit about divisions. Actually, I saw a couple of things. One of them was two people who were just, they had just met, they were getting to know each other and getting along fine until somehow one of them, I don't remember the context of why they shared it, but one of them happened to mention who they voted for. Well, the other one from that moment on said, oh my gosh, I don't want anything to do with you. Get away from me. Solely on the fact that they didn't agree with who they voted for. Okay, so we all know political division exists, and it's really rampant right now. We know that there's a division between, for lack of a better, I know we're discussing that we don't want movements, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, but for simplification purposes, the division between the grace movement people and people who are still of a religious mindset. I could go on and on, between male and female, between people who believe there's only those genders and there's many, and the ones that believe there are other options. Anyway, you guys don't need me to go through them all, but it is just a time almost like no other of division. And I just want to make sure that we, and I'm not the only one, I've read a lot of things lately and watched a lot, that we don't participate in any way within our, we have a tendency to disparage people who are still in the religious system, because we don't, because we escaped that, and some of us had very bad experiences in that. So, we reject anything that has anything to do with that. But we need to make sure that we are rejecting the system of religion and not religious people. We were all at one point or another, or most of us at the point that they're at, and we're all at different points. And so even within grace believers, there's a big disparity. Some believe this, some believe that, and we just tend to react badly to that. And I read something, I read a couple of things that I really liked. Let me get them really quick. We cannot reflect love while giving ourselves permission to hate. To whatever degree we influence the beliefs of others, compassionate, self-emptying love is the agent of revelation, not the intensity, methodology, or even the accuracy of our arguments. Compassionate, self-emptying love is what prompts revelation. We love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19. To inhabit the image of Christ, to mirror his nature and character to a world in confusion and pain, to be nothing less than as he is, so are we in this world, is to prioritize love above all else. Not being right, not winning, not achieving an agenda, not convincing someone of our point of view. Love alone reigns supreme, and we cannot reflect love while giving ourselves permission to hate. It is by this that everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you cherish mutual love, John 13:35. And then the other thing I wanted to read, because I really loved this, this seems so full of hope to me. What's the future of the church? The short answer is beauty, wonder, and glory. The long answer, I see a shift in emphasis from form to substance. While personal preferences for local gatherings, ranging from highly liturgical to unstructured, will remain, these forms will become secondary to the beauty of unconditional love that they reflect. Whether in a cathedral or a coffee shop, a basilica or a backyard, or on Zoom, the saints will gather around identity as participants in the divine nature. Our prejudice of labeling anything we dislike as religion will end, the focus having shifted to the Savior, whose endless mercy, kindness, and love envelops the whole world. We will no longer see us and them, but only the wide, miraculous span of varying expressions, all demonstrating the love of love himself. I just think that's beautiful and hope-filled. What a vision for the way things can be. Any thoughts on that? Oh, Philip, go ahead.
If we try to name it, we don't comprehend its dimension. It won't be conjured by a chorus or controlled from a pulpit. It's in us wherever we are. It's springing from our souls. It's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the scenes we see, the songs we hear. Our words and silences gather our congregation daily. Our prayers are our conversations. Our sermons are our actions. Our meals are our communion. Life informs our liturgy. Our experiences are our baptisms. Our demeanor is our testimony.
Amen.
Hey, would you, Melissa, I know you're probably busy, but could you send that, what you read and what Bob just said? I can't write fast enough. I'd love to have both of those.
Now, you'll get the video, so
No.
it'll have both in there. Yeah, I send the video out every
the
week.
video. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I forget.
Well,
But I will send what I read out in print because I have it in print. I mean, if Bob sends it to me, I will.
Okay.
I just put a link in chat. That's a blog that I wrote some time back. I just put a link in chat to what I read to you.
A good blog. Okay. Yes, I will send those out, Nina.
Thank you. They're
You're
beautiful.
welcome. Thank you. So are you.
If we want to give it an ism, and let's not, but we're coming into a time of who was it said, someone of great authority, and his name won't pop in my head. In 20 years, Christians will be mystics, or they won't be Christians. I mean, we're coming into a time, and I don't understand all I know about mysticism by any stretch of the imagination, but we're coming into a time where it's not gonna be definable. You're gonna hear, and you're gonna know, and different people are gonna hear different things, and it's going to come together.
Yes.
I posted the other day. What was it I posted the other day? I loved it. Theologians quarrel, but mysticisms speak the same language.
Yeah.
Mystics speak the same language. And that's true. I mean, it is a for lack of a better term, a mystical experience that we live in. That was Eckhart who said, Meister Eckhart, who said, theologians may quarrel, but mystics speak the same language. So there's an understanding that happens, and that's the ecclesia. Is the great body that comes together that brings all its individual understandings together, and they all make sense because they're the truth.
Yeah.
Is that a logical statement?
Yes.
I mean, each of us will see our part and we'll see it clearly, but we'll recognize the truth in the other person's part that they see clearly. So we'll recognize it's like when I consulted, I used to talk about the difference between entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurialism. The entrepreneur has the great vision, the great idea. And in order to be successful, ultimately, that entrepreneur needs to find entrepreneurs. These are people that see their portion of that vision. Like at the car dealership, the sales guy needs to see the sales part as his part. The finance guy needs to see getting the car financed for people as his part. And the service department needs to see keeping that car running as their part, right? So each of those is the entrepreneur is the dealer, but each of those are entrepreneurs within that entrepreneurial picture. And when it really works, and what I see happening is people are coming along and seeing grace, and that's their entrepreneurial piece, man. And they're preaching grace, and they're saying, I mean, I said the other day, this grace is so greasy it makes everything taste good. and that's great, but they don't say to the guy, they don't say to the guy who's seeing another portion of it. They don't say, but if your focus isn't on grace, you're wrong. They say, wow, what you're seeing about the universe of lack of separation, for example, that's absolutely true. And grace is a part of that, just like that's a part of grace. And to the one who sees that this is universal, that it applies to everyone, that there's no separation. That person can't say, well, if you don't, no separation is the truth, and grace is that's not the truth. No. The guy who sees no separation says, wow, grace is an absolute essential of no separation. And the grace guy is saying, wow, no separation is absolute proof of grace. So instead of these being divisions, instead of having a pie cut in pieces, you have the whole pie.
Yes, that's what we're envisioning. Hey, Philip, I think you had your hand up earlier and you kind of gave up. Well,
Well, I was just saying that, you know, in the years that I've been outside what you want to call institutional church or religion, I have seen so many changes in my beliefs. I begin to realize I hold on to my beliefs very, very loosely because they're continuously changing. On you know, the more you see more of Christ, the more I see how pigeonholed I've been thinking even just beforehand. So I learned to hold it loosely.
Yeah.
So I don't even think that beliefs are that it's the revelation of Christ or the indwelling Christ within us and within all and in all and through all. The more that actually becomes real within us, the more we begin to see those beliefs that some things I don't believe totally that some of you believe in. It's irrelevant because that's not the main issue.
Right.
So I felt sometimes a bit uncomfortable in the beginning and even the last couple of months or 1 or 2 years ago. But as time goes on, I see it's irrelevant because he is being revealed more and more within us and through us all so that we can, you know, I've noticed more, sometimes you meet people that are open to Christ in all. and sometimes you don't. But that doesn't matter because you still learn, we're still growing in the revelation of him being in all and through all.
Yes.
And I think that's the marvelous thing about, learning about who we really are, who we've always been. That's it.
John, the one
That's really
one who loved him. John, the one who stood at the cross with his mother, and Jesus said, "Behold, woman, thy son, behold, man, thy mother." John, who is the one that was not killed. He was boiled in oil. He was sent to the Isle of Patmos. All these things happened to him, but he's the guy that lived to be old. He's the guy whose accumulation of experience from the beginning to the end of his life had to give him a greater understanding of who Jesus was than anybody. As a matter of fact, we call him John the Revelator. And when the church recognized, wait a minute, this is John, man. This 90-year-old this guy walked with Jesus. This guy will have all the great theology, man. We've really got to hear from him. And they sat him down and they said, brother, give us the gospel. And he said, love one another.
Amen. That's good. Does anybody else have anything they want to share? I'm going to end this here in a couple of minutes because I'm just going to be truthful, because the border war basketball game is starting. And most of you are familiar, I think, with your Civil War history. This border rivalry goes way, way back. It's Kansas and Missouri.
What sport is that?
Basketball.
Oh, basketball. Okay.
Yeah, the rivalry between the Kansans and the Missourians goes all the way back to the Civil War. And,
oh, really?
They were on opposite sides. Yeah, the Missouri was an abolitionist. Kansas was an abolitionist state. Missouri was a pro-slavery state. So
But wasn't there before the Union? Wasn't there 13 colonies or 15?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but we're up in the Civil War times now.
Civil War, totally different era.
the county that Flo and I moved from, Clay County, Missouri, was the home of Jesse James, who was a disciple of and a follower of Quantrill, who came to Lawrence, Kansas, and burned it to the ground during the Civil War.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so 75 miles away, a whole bunch of guys lived that came to this town and burned it to the ground. Yeah,
there's quite a history between our two.
but basketball, that's what
basketball has nothing to do with
when a bunch of tall guys get out on the floor and dribble all over each other. I don't get it, I don't get it.
I do want to show you guys something really quick, because I think you'd all possibly be interested in this, and you might already know about it. But there's a new book out that I'm very interested in reading. Here, I'm going to share my screen. And it is. This is just a screenshot from, as soon as I get it up, from Amazon. And the book is titled Free to Gather at the Table of Grace. And it says, what if church was never meant to be a where, but a who? In this heartfelt exploration of ecclesia, 19 voices come together to share their experiences of gathering as his beloved. Through these stories, you'll discover the church as she truly is, a living, breathing reflection of the triune God, a family of beloved sons and daughters returning to love's table of grace. Beyond buildings and programs, these authors invite you into a sacred space of authentic community where acceptance leads to freedom, every face reflects love, and grace makes room for all. Whether in living rooms, digital spaces, coffee shops, or traditional sanctuaries, they paint a picture of gathering that flows from union, not obligation. for those questioning old paradigms, healing from past wounds, or simply longing to experience church as she was always meant to be. These stories will awaken you to the joy of freely gathering at Love's Table of Grace. Now, this is published by Robin Smith, and it has contributing authors include Catherine Toon, Malcolm Smith, Don Keithley, Jamie Engelhardt, just Keith Stanton, Matt Handel, lots and lots of Mike Zenker, lots of good authors. So I'm really interested in reading this, so I just thought I'd show it to you guys.
That looks good.
I know, right? So, and I have nothing to gain by, so I wasn't peddling the book. I just wanted to make sure everybody had seen it. It's brand new.
Like it.
All right. Anybody else want to say something?
Oh,
Yeah,
do you know?
I just want to say that I wanted to express my thanks to, well, obviously I can't anymore because of Paul Gray, but I met Paul Gray only a few months before he passed away.
Yes.
And I have learned so much about the deep love of God through being part of, our online assembly here. And I wanted to thank one or two people. You might know you are. We've had one or two hard talks, but it's actually helped me to learn to love beyond actually anything else. Love without actually an agenda and conditional, because we hear about the unconditional love of God for us, but to show that to one another, that has not been my way of thinking very easy. It's been hard for me. And I've learned this through being to get to know many of you, just through once a week meeting as a group. So, I just want to share my thanks and for, one or two individual chats I've had with some of you as well. And that's, I want to thank you. Thank you.
Philip, the motto of this call is "We are pretty awesome."
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, we are.
And Philip, we benefit from having you here, so thank you for what you add to our group.
What I always
Who
said
would
to
like
the grateful,
Go ahead.
what I
Sorry.
always said to the Grateful Saints before we went on stage is, let's go out there and give them heaven.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, does anybody want to close us in prayer? But that's a good close right there.
Let's do it, folks.
So let's go out and give them heaven. All right. Thank you, guys. Love you all.
Be blessed. Bye.
Shalom, shalom.
You know.
Bye now.